Hello and welcome back to another Rush Duel Links video. We've been having all sorts of news dropping day after day after day, giving us a ton more information about the cards, the characters and the skills that are going to be available during the launch of Rush Duels in Seven's World on Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Links. We're going to go through some of that today. So the first thing I want to take a look at is the Rush Duel Lightning Bolt Condor structure deck. Now we're looking at this on Duel Links Meta, and this is where a lot of the revealed information has been compiled by It's Brad as HD, link to him down in the description. But talking about the deck specifically, this deck looks a little bit underwhelming. The boss monsters in here, Lightning Bolt Condor and Darkness Crested Hawk, are difficult to use, and even when you do get their effects off, they are good, but not crazy. They're not like ridiculous. The Darkness Crested Hawk, if your opponent has a face-up light attribute monster on the field, send the top card of deck to the graveyard. One face-up winged beast type monster on your field gains 1000 attack until the end of the turn. So 2100 attack does kind of suck, but because it is a winged beast itself, you can always use its effect on itself. So as long as your opponent has a light monster, you can gain 1000 attack, which is decent. 3100 attack is not bad. The problem is guaranteeing your opponent has a light monster. And Lightning Bolt Condor has a similar problem. Send one monster from your hand to the graveyard. All face-up monsters on your opponent's field with the same attribute as the monster sent to the graveyard to meet the requirement lose attack and defense equal to the level of that monster sent to the graveyard times 300. So again, this can be really, really good if you have the right monster to send. So ideally you want a high level, so it reduces all your opponent's monsters by quite a lot, and it has to match the attribute. Now there is a skill that comes along with Lightning Bolt Condor that forces your opponent's monsters to be light and lets you add a light winged beast monster to your hand, which can make this card actually somewhat playable. I don't think that skill is going to suddenly make this deck unbelievably tier 1, but it will definitely give it some legs, and we've been saying since the very start that the main thing we've been looking for from the skills is to make the weaker boss monster stronger, and that is exactly what we are seeing in this case. So I could see Lightning Bolt Condor being competitive. I could see it being maybe not tier 1. I'm not sure I'd be pushing that hard, but you never know, maybe. We'll have to wait and see what actually happens. As for the rest of the deck, we've got Torna the Windweaver, which we now know is limit 3, which is an interesting choice. But this is an okay card. You contribute this out because it's level 6. Send one card from your hand to the graveyard, change the battle position of one monster in your opponent's field. So that's not a terrible effect. Changing to defense can be really, really strong. A lot of the boss monsters in this game have a lot lower defense in their attack. I'm not sure this card needed to be limit 3, but it is, so I guess that's fine. Next up we have Luminous Parrot. If your opponent has 2 or more face-up monsters on the field, send the top card of your deck to the graveyard. The attribute of one face-up monster on your opponent's field becomes light. So again, this is a great card to combine with our other boss monsters to force our opponent's monsters to be light and thus turn on our effects and let us kind of play the game. So it's a decent consistency card for this deck specifically, but outside of this, I'm not sure this is going to be particularly great. Next up, we just got some 1500 vanillas because why not? Dark Sorcerer is fine. Fire Golem again is okay, it's a little bit slow. It does reduce the defense of a monster by 600, but that monster already has to be face up, so if your opponent sets something like a Yami Ruler, which has the 2500 defense, we have to wait an entire turn to be able to deal with it, assuming it didn't just, normal summon it and then change the defense using its effect, in which case, yeah, Fire Golem will deal with it fine. We have Trick Pigeon, which is pretty good. This card will see a lot of play later in Harpies. We can send one spell trap from our hand to the graveyard, add a winged beast type monster with 1500 or more attack from our graveyard to our hand. This is really good to, again, to get back our boss monsters, and again later on when Harpies does come out, however long that is, this will again be a very needed card for that deck. Next up we have Mystic Dealer. I was a little bit concerned that this might be the only way to obtain this card, but we have seen this will be available in the first main box, so I guess it's fine just to have one copy in here. It's a great card. Send a spellcaster monster from your hand to the graveyard, draw a card. We still haven't seen Dark Revelation though, so I'm not sure how good Spellcaster's actually going to be on release. Dark Revelation was a card that made, even though the spellcasters were a little bit weak, it did give them that, oh well, we have 3 copies of Mirror Force, so it doesn't matter that our attack isn't as high as we'd like it. So I'm not sure how spellcasters are going to fare at release. Next up, Giant Tortoise Agreed. This card is just terrible. When your opponent normal summons a monster, draw 2 cards. It's okay if you already have a full hand, I guess, and you want to just draw over that 5 limit. Other than that, not particularly useful. We've got Spell Archer, which is going to be the other wind spellcaster of choice other than Torna. I'm not sure if we're going to have access to the other effect wind monsters yet. I assume they'll probably be coming out later, but they offer some Grave Hate and they will take this card's place when they come out. Next up we have Harpy Girl. Again, it's just a winged beast monster. Next up we have Hydro Magician, just a terrible card. Level 5, 1700 attack, Water Spellcaster. There are so many better Water Spellcasters up to and including Mystic Dealer, who is right here. This card is just straight up bad. We have Strange Cat, which again I think is already going to be power crap, because I believe Doriado is already out, which has 1200 attack and 1400 defense, which means unfortunately this card's probably not going to see much play either. Then we have Flame Manipulator, which again is just a pretty terrible card. And then the only spell card in the deck is Darkness Approaches, which is really bad removal. And it's only soft removal, because all it does is change a monster to defense mode, but sometimes that is going to be enough. I don't think this card is going to see play just because of the deck size changes. Now that decks are only going to be between 30 and 40 cards, most people will probably opt to play 30 card decks, and that means the number of spell traps they're running will be cut even more. And Rush Duel is already a format where finding room for all of the spell traps you want to include is very difficult. The space is very competitive, so I don't think Darkness Approaches is ever really going to take those spots. So next up, we'll take a look at all the cards that have been revealed from the first main box. So we don't have all of them yet. At the top here you can see Multi-Strike Dragon Dragius, Yami Ruler, and Torna the Windweaver are all limited 3, which is interesting. That means we will not be seeing what was predicted, which was the Multi-Strike Dragon Dragius and Yami Ruler deck. We'll have to kind of mix and match. I think most people will probably opt to just play one or the other, then try and split them down the middle. But ultra rares are pretty good. We've got the 7's Road Magician, we've got the Multi-Strike Dragon Dragius. Again, 7's Road is going to be a little bit weaker without Dark Revelation, but it's still a fine boss monster. You could basically chuck this in just about anything as long as the skill will allow it, and it can boost itself to at least over 25, which is all you really need for this card to be usable. Dragius, again, is fantastic. Being able to attack twice is always going to be really strong, and 2500 is a fantastic attack value. Next up, Karibot. This is going to probably be okay earlier, but fall off later. And again, with the deck size reduction, this card might even see a little bit less play than I'm even expecting. This card is basically really good to just summon out multiple Karibots and use them as tribute fodder to get out your bigger monsters. Next up, Dragonic Slayer. This is Spell Trap Hate for dragons, and again, we do have a skill that does work with this, so maybe it'll probably be fine early, but I'm not sure if we'll see much play after the first couple of sets. Prima Gitana, again, fantastic boss monster. Pay 1000 life points. Again, that is a little bit steeper when we've only got 6000 of them. All face-up monsters on your field gain attack equal to the number of monsters in your opponent's field times 300 until the end of this turn, which can be really good. The main benefit of this is it boosts all of your monsters. So even though it's only got 2200 attack, it could boost, for example, your Multi-Strike Dragon Dragius and make it even bigger and crash over your opponent's big threatening monsters. Then we have Yami Ruler. It's kind of a floodgate monster, but 2500 attack, 2500 defense is really good. And being able to stop your opponent from tributing monsters, if only for one turn, is still very strong. Then finally, Dark Magician Girl. Obviously, we'll be getting a copy of Dark Magician, so this card will be okay. Maybe with its skill, this card will be somewhat okay, but I'm not holding my breath that Dark Magician is going to be super playable. But again, we'll have to get our hands on the skill, really test it out and see how it feels. So for the super rares, we've got some dragon support, we've got some spellcaster support, some pyro stuff, which is pretty cool. We also did get a pyro skill, so we'll have to see if we can actually do anything with this. It's basically just going to be a normal monster turbo deck with Spice the Elite Noodle Ninja as the boss monster. We've got Thunder the Thunder, which is a decent kind of generic card. We send a card from my hand to the graveyard. One face-up monster in your opponent's field loses 300 attack. This can be really good if, for example, you find yourself in a lot of Dragius mirrors and you don't want to crash your 25 into their 25. You can reduce their attack by the 13. And also, if we've got too many bricks in our hand, too many high levels, we can just discard one of those. And then the discard effect actually ends up being more fortunate for us than a detriment. Next up, Full Meteor Impact. Again, this is not a great card, but it does have 2500 attack. 2500 attack is decent, I guess. 0 defense kind of sucks, and with the skill, maybe this card will see some play. Phantom Bind is probably the best generic trap we're going to have for a while. Being able to reduce monsters' attack even only by a little bit can be really good. It can stop crashes and it can stop people from beating over your bigger monsters. Kime Ruler, again, 2500 attack is a decent stat, but again, this effect is not super useful. Sometimes it does come up, and we'll have to see what happens with that. This also will be used in fusions later, so it's definitely not a bad idea to pick these up now. Then we've got some more warrior support, we got some more psychic support, and then Hammer Crush. Hammer Crush is, again, the generic spell trap hate. This will be very important if you're trying to play decks that aren't dragons or spellcasters or psychics, and you still really want to be hitting that back row. You're really going to need Hammer Crush. And then down here we have a lot of 1500 vanillas, which is quite surprising. We have the Dark Sorcerer, we have the Dragorite, we have the Masaki, and we have the Gazelle. So a lot of vanilla monsters. Very interesting. All of these are 1500s. We're not seeing many of the other kind of weaker vanilla monsters in here. We've also got the 2 sports dragons, which again are really good for getting out tribute fodder. You just summon them, they summon the other one from the graveyard, and then we tribute them off of our dragon monsters. Then we also have Fire Golem, we have the Mystic Dealer, and we have the Trick Pigeon, all from the starter deck, which tells us maybe we don't need to get those decks unless we specifically want to build the kind of Lightning Bolt Condor deck. And then down here again, Battle Shark Samagellon. Unfortunately, not a particularly good boss monster, but he has been relegated down into the rare slot, which is a bit of a shame. Hopefully we'll see a skill for this card to actually make it somewhat usable, but the fact that they've already made it a rare tells me they probably don't have very high hopes for it. So next up, we have some other confirmed cards. These are cards that you will get from... We're not necessarily sure. These will either be level up rewards or gate drops or something. These cards might also be available from the rest of the box, because obviously we've not seen the entirety of the main box yet, but it's still quite nice to look at them nonetheless. We already know we're getting a Summon Skull. It says here it will be available via a bundle deal, including cards, sleeves, and packs. So that'll be the way to get Summon Skull, which means presumably we won't be able to get this any other way, so you have to make sure you get the bundle. Severing Psychic Wall, again, confirmed to be a Roman Cassidy level up reward. This is a small combat trap for Psychics. It will probably be relevant early. So Rise Terra Secure is also here. It's an interesting card, and the main reason this card is so interesting is just because it wasn't available very early on in 7s. We also have Dian Keto the Boogie Master, 2400 beta. This is Mimi's boss monster, so it'll be interesting to see if we get Mimi early. Max Raider as well, 2400 attack. This card was never really good, but I really don't think Max Raider is going to be a particularly good boss monster, but maybe there'll be a skill for it. Next up we have Pierce. Pierce is an interesting one. It gives a monster piercing damage just for the turn. It can be enough to close games, especially if you can make a giant monster like 7's Road Magician, or if you have multi-attack like Dragius. Being able to pierce twice or pierce for a ton can sometimes just win games out of nowhere, so we might see this card seeing some early play. Then down here we have Doriado. This is another card worth mentioning because, again, it is just immediately power creeps Strange Cat, 1400 defense, 1200 attack, and it's the Earth Spellcaster, which again you'll want for having all the different attributes of Spellcaster for 7's Road Magician. Another interesting one is Stone Dragon. This is another card that did not come out until the end of 7s, or early Go Rush, but it's interesting that it's here. Again, a card that probably will not see any play whatsoever, but again, you never know, we might see a skill. Alright, the last thing we want to take a look at is some of the new skills that were announced. So again, these are all translated from Japanese and so may not be 100% accurate, but there is some interesting stuff in here. 7's Road Axel is a Yuga skill. Skill can only be used in decks where the only monsters with 1400 or more attack are spellcasters. We can send one face-up monster with 1600 attack that was normal summon this turn, increase its attack by 800 to the end of the turn. From turn 4 and onwards, you can also return one card from your hand to the deck, and once per duel, add 7's Road Magician from your deck to your hand. So 1600 attack is very specifically targeting 7's Road Witch, so we'll give our 7's Road Witch an extra 800 attack, which will put up to 24, then we can get 7's Road Magician to our hand, then we can use Witch's Effect, which will give it an extra 400 attack by summoning the 7's Road Magician, and then use 7's Road Magician to boost itself to a big number as well. So it's not bad. We'll basically keep our 7's Road Witches being relevant, keeping them at 24. If you're not able to use the effect to summon another monster though, it's going to be stuck at 24, and 24 is a little bit low. But this is okay if we're planning to try and make a Spellcaster Turbo deck. Next up we have the Lightning Shift. This is the Volt Condor skill. So this skill can only be used if monsters with 1400 or more attack in your deck are spellcasters or winged beasts. Can be activated during the turn you have summoned a level 7 or higher monster. One face-up monster on your opponent's field becomes light attribute until the end of the turn. If you have a face-up Lightning Bolt Condor on your field, you can add a level 4 or lower light attribute winged beast type monster from your graveyard to your hand. So this basically fixes Lightning Bolt Condor in a lot of ways. We can force our opponent's monsters to be light, ideally then take back our parrot back to our hand, summon that out, turn another monster to be light, discard a light monster from our hand. Ideally, it'll probably again be a second Lightning Bolt Condor, but weaken all of our opponent's monsters by 2100 attack, and then try and attack over all of their guys for a crap ton of damage and hopefully end the game. And this is not a once per turn skill, which means this does make Lightning Bolt Condor somewhat competitive, which again is exactly what we've been looking for. We've been saying since we knew that skills were going to be in, that we want skills to make pretty much useless or bad boss monsters become competitive, become playable, become very powerful, and that's exactly what we're seeing from this skill. Next up, Explosive Drive, another Yuga skill. This skill can only be used in decks where the only monsters are spellcasters and rock type. So we can select one face-up fire attribute monster on a field, this turn increase the level of the monster by 1 and increase its attack by 500. Then you can set Road Magic Explosion from your hand in your spell and trap zone. If you do, select one monster that's a fire attribute with 800 or less defense in your graveyard and add it to your hand. So Road Magic Explosion is an interesting one. If we have a face-up level 7 or higher spellcaster type monster on our field, send a fire attribute monster from your hand to the graveyard, inflict damage to your opponent equal to the number of cards on their field times 400. So it's not the best card, but getting an extra burn spell I guess is fine. The main thing we want this for is the fire attribute monster. This, I would assume, is primarily aimed at full meteor impact, who again has 0 defense, 2500 attack, and is a fire rock monster. We'll be able to give him an extra 500 attack, boosting him up to 3000. On top of that, the other effect of this skill will let us add it back to our hand from our graveyard. So again, a way to kind of just recycle full meteor impact. Again, I don't know if this is going to be enough to make full meteor impact good, but at the very least, again, this is what we want. We want ways to buff the worst boss monsters that never really got to see a lot of play, and this is exactly the way to do it. Unfortunately, it does require us to play around Road Magic Explosion, which we're not really going to want to be running, and we have to be playing this, we have to keep reusing it, and its effect does require us to send monsters from our hand to the graveyard. Now, obviously, we could just use the monster we get back to our hand with this skill to send for this effect, but it's a little bit tricky. I'd rather just not have this tied to Road Magic Explosion at all, but I can understand why they've done it. They want to keep it all thematic. Next up, Set Sparks, which is a Yugioh and Roman skill. It can only be used once per duel. Set 1 Sparks from your deck or graveyard in your spell and trap zone. Not super useful. Now, Spark Heart's Girl will probably come out eventually, and this will have synergy with that, but even that I don't think is really going to be worth it. Sparks only does 200 damage. It's not a very good card. This is not a very good skill. Next up, Dragonic Resonance, a Luke skill. This skill can be used if the only monsters in your deck are Dragon type. It can be activated if you have a face-up Earth attribute effect monster with 1500 or more attack or 1300 or more defense. This turn, up to 2 face-up monsters with 2300 or less attack on your field gain 500 attack, and their level is increased by 4. So this is a tricky one. So this has to be Earth attribute effect monsters. So if we head over here, our Earth attribute effect monsters are going to be Dragonic Slayer. This is going to be the primary target for it, I would assume. But this skill has to be used with 1500 or more attack or 1300 or more defense. So Dragonic Slayer again does fit that bill, and I suppose Gravity Press Dragon also fits this bill. It's a tricky skill because it's basically trying to make the worst dragons better. I'm not sold on this skill, but maybe there's something there. And then down here we have Curse of the Dark, which is a Luke skill. This skill can only be used in decks where the only monsters level 4 or higher are normal monster dragon types and multi-strike dragon dragons. So the only monsters we can run are normal monsters that are dragons and multi-strike dragon dragons. That's already very, very specific in its deck restrictions. We can select one face-up normal monster that's a dark attribute on our field that was summoned this turn, increases attack by 500 to the end of the turn. Then if we chose our Dragon Knight of Darkness, which is obviously going to be the target of choice for this, which is only a 1600 level 5 monster, which is not a very good card, you can also return one card from your hand to your deck, and if you do, increase its attack by 700 as long as that monster is face up. Now, the one saving grace here is that this is a permanent boost. So the 500 again is just going to be to the end of the turn. That's going to put it up to 21, but then the extra 7 is going to be then putting it even further up to 28. So at the end of the turn, it will return back down to 23. So I think this is going to be a bit of a gimmick skill, but there may be something there. Overall, I'm not convinced this is going to be doing very well, but I guess you never know. The next up, we have Dragon Grace. This skill can be used in decks where the only monsters of 1400 attack or higher are dragon types. So can be activated during the turn you have summoned a Dragon Sage, which again, not a particularly interesting card, 1100 attack, but we can select one monster on our field that's a dragon type. This turn increases attack by 400, but it cannot attack directly. So this is generic, has to be used in a dragon deck, but a generic skill is still fine. If we just want to play Dragius Beatdown, this might be good enough. If we're planning to attack directly, we just don't use the skill. And if we aren't planning to attack directly, we could just use this to boost our guy. Seems fine to me. Next up, we have Devil Strength, the Gavin skill. This skill can only be used in decks where the only monsters with 1400 attack or more are warrior types. So it can be activated the turn you summon a monster that's level 6 or higher, that's Earth or Dark attribute, and a warrior type. So again, very specific, but I guess it's not too bad since it's any 6 or higher, and it's any Earth or Dark, but it does have to be a warrior. Select one monster in attack position on your opponent's field, change it to defense position. Again, a pretty good generic skill. Not anything overpowered, but again, if we just want to play the warrior kind of Yami ruler deck, this is fine to be played with it. Next up, another Gavin skill, Blue Hawk's Formation. Can only be used in a deck that has 6 or more normal monsters that are level 5 or higher with 1400 defense or higher. That is very, very specific. And only monsters that are level 4 or higher can be warrior, winged beast, or fairies. So again, this is already getting a bit crazy. There's so many weird restrictions on this that building a deck around this is really going to be a bit of a headache. But can be activated during the turn you summon a normal monster that's level 4 or higher with 1300 attack or more and 1400 defense or more, so again, very specific. Select one face-up monster on your opponent's field, reduces attack and defense by 800. That effect is very, very good. Reducing monsters' attack and defense by 800 is fantastic in Rush Duel. It's just how many hoops are you going to have to jump through to build a deck that can actually pull this off. I'm not convinced, but I will try this out when we get our hands on the game. The next up, Climax Beat, a Roman skill. This skill can be used if the only monsters in your deck are Psychic type monsters with 2400 or less attack. So again, I think there's only one Psychic boss monster that has 2500 attack that will be available early, and I don't think we'll actually have access to it on launch, so maybe this will be fine just in a pure Psychic deck. Can be activated on turn 2 onward when you summon the level 2 monster. Set a Climax Finale, which is an okay card, can reduce the monster's attack. Or Lullabind, which again can change a monster to face down defense position, which is also pretty good. Again, changing battle position will be very strong early. From your deck or graveyard into your spell and trap zone. If your life points are 1000 or lower, you can gain 1000. So this is very important. So first off, we just get to get one of our spell cards back, which can be very, very strong. But also, we don't have to gain the 1000, which means if we are at under 1000 and we want to stay there for some of our other effects, we can choose to stay there. If not, we can just gain some life points. So again, this seems like a pretty good skill. This is probably going to be the Psychic skill of choice if we're looking to build a pure Psychic deck. Next up, Psychic Drive. This skill can only be used in decks where the only monsters with 1400 attack or more are Psychic types. Pay 300 life points, select one face-up monster level 5 or higher on your field that was summoned this turn and increase its attack by 400 until the end of the turn. Then if you chose Prima Katana, you can select one normal monster that's level 2 in your graveyard and add it to your hand. So again, another pretty good skill. This will boost Prima Katana up to 2600, which is very relevant. Being higher than 25 means it can attack over Yamirula, it can attack over Ragius, and being able to get level 2 Psychic back to our hand is also pretty good. So although I've just said Climax Beat looks like a pretty good skill, I actually think Psychic Drive might be a pretty good skill on its own. This actually has a lot of potential. Next up, Fire Noodle Boost. So this skill can only be used in a deck with at least 6 or more normal monsters that are Pyro type with 1300 attack or less, and monsters level 5 or higher that are Fire attribute with 2400 less attack and 0 defense, and normal monsters Pyro. Again, this is very, very specific restrictions, and again, these are also translated from Japanese, but again, building decks around this is going to be a little bit of a headache. We're just going to have to get in there and really mess with it, but we can select one face-up monster level 5 or higher, or one face-up Pyro-type monster with 1300 attack or less that was normal summon this turn, increase its attack by 400. Again, fine. I guess if you really want to play a Pyro deck, this is going to probably be the skill for you, but there's nothing particularly interesting about the skill. 400 attack is decent. That's all there is to say about it. Next up, Magician Shuffle. This skill can be used if you have no effect monsters with 2500 or more attack in your deck. So again, this is looking to be played with Dark Magician and Dark Magician Girl. Obviously, Dark Magician is a non-effect monster, and Dark Magician Girl does not have more than 2500 attack. Can be activated on turn 2 onward by revealing one Dark Attribute spellcaster monster with 1700 or more defense in your hand to your opponent. Add a Dark Magician or Dark Magician Girl from your deck or graveyard to your hand, then send one Dark Attribute spellcaster type monster with 1700 or more defense from your hand to the graveyard. So being able to keep getting back Dark Magician or Dark Magician Girl is fine. The requirement for this is a little bit tricky because we've got to have Dark Attribute monster with 1700 or more defense. That's a little bit tricky, as well as we have to send the card to the graveyard to actually get the Dark Magician or Dark Magician Girl back. So I am not super impressed by this skill, but I'll probably try it out for fun. I'm not expecting this to be good, but it will probably be okay. And then finally, Servant of the Beginning. This skill can only be used in a deck with at least 5 or more normal monsters with 1500 defense or higher, and monsters that are level 4 or higher have 1200 defense or higher. You can use this skill when you summon a normal monster with 2100 defense, or a legend normal monster that's level 6 or 7. So again, this is looking to be, I guess, Dark Magician or Summon Skull. Select one face-up normal monster on your field, increases attack by 600. So again, this would put both of those monsters up to 3100, which is a pretty big number. I guess we could also use this with Gaia the Fierce Knight, assuming that card's available, and that will boost up to 29, which again is still relevant. Obviously, we'd like to get over that 3000 just in case, but 29 is still bigger than 25, so that is something. Again, I'm not expecting the skill to be anything super big and fancy, but if we want to play like a Summon Skull beatdown deck, this could be a pretty good way to go about it. And so there we go, that is pretty much everything that we know. I'm really looking forward to get my hands on this tomorrow. It already feels so strange that it's come around so quickly, and the anticipation has been nothing but building and building and building over this time, and it's been really, really fun to watch content creators putting out videos, people that got sponsored and got their hands on it early. We got to like comb through the videos to find any little snippets, and that's how we found out about the restrictions and all these extra cards that have been confirmed and some of the skills. It's been really, really fun time, but finally tomorrow we'll get our hands on it, we'll get to actually play, we'll get to build some decks, and I'll make sure to put out even more videos. So that's going to be all from me. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.